What's up, party people? We're back at it. We're here to study for the exam. We're here to pass the exam. We're here to pass the exam. Hope you all had a good Thanksgiving. I did. It was quiet. There was some snow. It was cold. There was a lot of good food. Anyway, we're back at it. We got another question. This one's a long case vignette because I had to have a separate sheet of paper to put the answers on, which I'll swap out later. Do you guys ever feel like the world's on fire? No, just me? Okay. All right, well, enough about me and what I got going on. Let's get back at it with another question. We got to get you guys across that finish line. Your patient comes into the clinic for their appointment with you. They sit down and their eyes keep shifting and they can't keep their hands still. You ask what's wrong and they tell you the FBI has been watching them, listening to their calls, and tracking their whereabouts. They don't have evidence and they just know it's happening. Your patient is most likely experiencing... Oh, 1 second. Got it. A, hallucinations. B, delusion. C, mania. Or D, depression. Everybody in this house is black. Everybody. Got it into one frame. Okay. Look at that. Critical thinking skills at their finest. So, the correct answer is B, a delusion. So, what are these other options, right? So, what is a hallucination? A hallucination is a sensory perception of something that is not real. So it's not real, it's not there. So you can have an auditory hallucination, which means that you are seeing things that are not there. You can have auditory hallucinations are hearing things that are not there. Visual hallucinations are seeing things that are not there. It's been a long day at work. And then you can also have tactile hallucinations, which is when you might feel things that are not there or not touching you or things like that. You can also have olfactory hallucinations, which means you're smelling things that are not there. So oftentimes hallucinations are more sensory in nature in terms of like tapping into one of the 5 senses that you might have and it not being real or it not being there. Hallucinations are also things that can be triggered by a couple different situations. So psychosis or a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia can cause hallucinations of any of those categories. Sleep deprivation can also cause hallucinations in any of those categories. You can also have a neurological condition, and that neurological condition can sometimes trigger hallucinations of some sort. Other things that could cause it, a brain tumor, depending on where the brain tumor is though. So it's not just as simple as you have one. It has to press on a specific lobe in a specific way for it to potentially trigger that. So it's not just any brain tumor or anything like that. So neurological, psychotic, sleep deprivation, things like that. Drug use is also something that can induce hallucinations. And it's not the same for everybody. So one drug could cause a hallucination for somebody that that same drug doesn't trigger in anyone else. The other factor that could come into play there is it could just be a bad trip that somebody had off of a drug. Maybe they've used marijuana a lot, often, for most of their lives, and all of a sudden they have a hallucination off of it. It varies, and there's not always a way to know if you will or won't, but substance use and drug use can absolutely trigger a hallucination. Okay, so what is a delusion? So a delusion is a fixed false belief that is held with absolute conviction even when no evidence has been shown to prove it to be a thing. So that falls into the category for a lot of people in the context of what this question was asking. So this patient came into the office, right? And they kind of kept shifting, they kept looking around, they were real nervous, it was real awkward. You ask them what's wrong, they tell you the FBI has been watching them, listening to their calls, and tracking their whereabouts. They don't have any evidence. They just know it to be true. So this falls into the delusion in terms of like, they know it to be true, right? There is absolute conviction that this is true, and it's more than likely when these delusions come up, they're not happening. That's not to say that nobody in the history of the world has ever had the FBI watching them, listening to their calls, and tracking their whereabouts, right? We know that's happened. Learned about it in history class, I'm sure. But the chances that your patient is experiencing that is potentially not happening, and they could be having an active delusion. Now, how you would manage that, you're gonna go into whatever assessment you need to figure out what that looks like. Do they need to be hospitalized? Are they safe? Things like that. That is how you're gonna manage that, but that is what a delusion is. Okay, so what is mania? Mania, which is a symptom of bipolar 1, and hypomania, which is a symptom of bipolar 2, but for just in general mania is a state of abnormally elevated mood or irritable mood, which is also accompanied by increased energy. So we are bouncing off the walls and we have an elevated mood, or we are real irritated. That's mania. And last but not least, what is depression? Pretty hallmark, but depression can range, right? So you can have persistent depressive disorder, which is a less intense sadness for the duration of time also being shorter. Major depression, which usually is the heavier of the two in terms of like the symptoms are more severe generally. They are potentially lasting for a lot longer. And then there's also to some extent an aspect that leads you to believe that their safety or well-being is potentially in jeopardy. They might have suicidal thoughts that are accompanied by this, but depression is a very heavy, low mood that comes usually accompanied by sadness, hopelessness, helplessness, sometimes suicidal thoughts, sometimes changes in appetite in the way someone's eating. So they might, in a depressive state, eat more than they normally would or eat less than they normally would, which can cause a fluctuation in their weight. They also might be sleeping a whole bunch, not sleeping at all. There could be those changes in the way that they're sleeping. So a lot of things can accompany depression, but in general, depression as a whole is going to be like that lower, heavier mood. It's leaning more towards sadness and hopelessness. So, how'd you do? Did you get the right one? If you did, great. Keep it going. If you didn't, that's okay. Rewatch the video from the beginning. See where some of the question and what it was asking. Make sure you understand what it was asking, the important information versus the fluff that the question might have given you. And then I always like to put this when I do these questions as much as I can in a different color. Usually they're in bold or in all caps, but for the sake of this, because everything's bold and in all caps, I'll put it in a different color. Most likely. So you're going to look at what it most likely sounds like based off of everything that they're telling you. That is usually how you want to approach diagnostic situations. Of course, yes, you want to ask more questions, but if all you had to go off of was this information right here that they were giving you, what are they most likely experiencing? And based off of that, that's how you can kind of decide either what your next set of questions are clinically, how you might try to intervene in the moment if it seems like we need to get you more help sooner rather than later, or how to ground them. Again, depending on what they say that they're experiencing. That's going to be the key to almost any test you're going to take, especially multiple choice tests. Understand what the question is asking you, find the information that you need to be able to answer what it's asking you, and then remove answer choices that don't fall into what you're looking for. Process of elimination can at least get you down to hopefully 2 or 3 answer choices instead of 4. And then that makes it even easier for you to be like, all right, well, now that I know it's not this, we have these answer options left. Here's what it could be. Thank you for joining us today on Social Work Exam Prep. There will be more questions that we're gonna go over. We're gonna dive into, we're gonna peel them back, the layers like onions. I did watch Shrek recently, that's where that came from. But come back to Social Work Exam Prep and there'll be more questions and more understandings. Good luck.